Happy to be joined this morning by co-founder of Dropsite News, Jeremy Scahill. Great to see you, sir.
Thank you, Krystal. Hey, Emily.
Yeah, of course. So let's go ahead and put this first element up on the screen. There's a lot going on this week as President Trump heads to the Middle East. We got this announcement that I'll just read from President Trump's Truth Social here. I'm happy to announce that Idan Alexander, an American citizen who's been held hostage since October 2023, is coming home to his family. I'm grateful to all those involved in making this monumental news happen. This was a step taken in good faith towards the U.S. and the efforts of the mediators, Qatar and Egypt, to put an end to this very brutal war and return all living hostages and remains their loved ones. Hopefully, this is the first of those final steps necessary to end this brutal conflict. Look very much forward to that day of celebration. So, Jeremy, just to start off with, can you break down some of the context in which this agreement and this ability to return Idan Alexander was obtained?
Well, I mean, one of the aspects of this that is truly extraordinary is that this is the first time that the United States has made a direct deal with Hamas that does not involve Israel. That's a major step away from Biden era policy. For instance, there were a number of people with U.S. citizenship who were taken captive on October 7th during Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, and the Biden administration stood by and refused to actually negotiate directly with Hamas and constantly deferred to the Israelis. So what we're seeing is a kind of unorthodox aspect of Donald Trump's presidency. He recently made a deal with what the U.S. considers to be a foreign terrorist organization and a non-state actors, Ansar Allah, the Houthis of Yemen. Now you have the U.S. Beginning in February engaged in direct talks with Hamas that is now leading to the release of a dual U.S.-Israeli citizen. The other aspect of this, Krystal, that's really significant is that during this entire 19-month period, there has not been a single male Israeli soldier that has been released from captivity in Gaza. And it's important to remember, a lot of the coverage of this implies that Idan Alexander was a civilian that was kidnapped. Well, Hamas considers him to be a prisoner of war because he was an active duty soldier in the Israeli military on October 7th. He was captured by Palestinian fighters in uniform while serving in a military that the Palestinians view as an occupying force that is operating on behalf of an apartheid entity. So, there are details of this that I think we need to remember factually. Recently, when I was meeting with senior officials from Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, they indicated that for months they have told the United States that they are willing, as what they call a goodwill gesture, to release Idan Alexander. And part of this is that Hamas views Trump. They know that Trump's administration is filled with Zionists. They know that Trump's administration is very pro-Israel. That's the big picture of this. But on a sort of technical level, they feel that they have a better shot with negotiating something with Steve Witkoff and Adam Boehler than they did with Antony Blinken or Bill Burns when Biden was president.
Well, let's put the next element on the screen, Jeremy, because this kind of gets to exactly what you were just saying. I mean, you pointed out that this was the first deal brokered directly between the United States and Hamas without Israel. And I mean, there have been some interesting comments from the Israeli right in the last 24 to 48 hours. And I just wanted to see, what you make of all of these developments. Does this signal maybe the next chapter in the United States relationship with Israel? Is Israel realizing sort of the hardcore Israeli right, realizing that maybe they want to disentangle from the United States as well? I mean, basically, what's the reaction been like in the last 24 or 48 hours politically from Israel?
Well, last week you saw Miriam Adelson, who is a U.S. and Israeli citizen. Her husband, of course, was Sheldon Adelson. She gave $100 million to Trump's re-election effort in the last election cycle. And she owns a newspaper in Israel. And that paper really was kind of fanning the flames of this, the idea that there are indications that the Trump administration is sort of kicking Netanyahu under the bus, is distancing itself from Israel. I think we should be really careful about embracing that narrative too much. There's a big picture here, which is that Trump's agenda is an extremely pro-Israel agenda. He puts Mike Huckabee in as the ambassador. Their rhetoric on the West Bank indicates that they're moving toward recognizing full Israeli annexation of the West Bank. We could talk for hours about the ways in which the Trump administration has facilitated Netanyahu's agenda, including taking the leash off and letting Netanyahu go scorched earth ever since March 18th, killing upwards of 2,600 Palestinians, many of them women and children, including really indiscriminate attacks on camps housed by housing displaced persons. But on a micro level, yes, Emily, there's something really interesting going on, which is that Donald Trump, of course, is a transactional guy. He also thinks very highly of himself. He thinks very highly of his legacy. And he is right now on his way in a day to the Middle East, where he's going to meet with Saudi Arabia and try to secure this more than $1 trillion deal that involves weapons sales and other economic matters. Similar deal being made with the United Arab Emirates. Of course, there's going to be a lot of focus on the airplane that Qatar is reportedly going to be giving Trump. Trump seems to really want the Gaza war to be done. He called it a brutal war and said that it's time to wrap it up in that Truth Social post that you cited earlier. So I think what we're seeing here is have no illusion about the fact that Donald Trump wants to facilitate a horrifying agenda on behalf of the Israelis. But on the technical aspects, where Netanyahu starts to mess with, let's just say, America's business as Trump views it, which is also Trump's business and his family's business, then I think we have some space that opens up where people like Witkoff and Adam Boehler become quite interesting to the Palestinian negotiators. And I've said on this show many times before, and I'll say it again, there is a chance that Trump's interests align enough with stopping that war that it benefits the Palestinians of Gaza, who have endured a horrifying genocide under both Biden and Trump.
How does this square with the reporting we saw last week from Reuters that there were high-level discussions centered around a U.S. occupation of Gaza that would be based on the Iraq government, our occupation of Iraq after and during the Iraq War? How do these talks square with that? Square with Trump previously floating, we're going to clear out all of the Palestinians, we're going to let the world's people be in Gaza, his big real estate development plans there. How are you making sense of those things, and how are the Hamas officials you're speaking with making sense of those things?
Yeah, I mean, this morning I was communicating with a leader within the Palestinian armed resistance, and he was saying, look, Hamas is taking a gamble here by making this deal for Idan Alexander because they're not getting anything on paper in return that we know of. None of my sources have said that the U.S. committed to anything. And the calculus here on their part is it relates to what I was saying earlier. They feel that their best shot right now is to try to accentuate the divisions on a tactical level between Netanyahu and Trump in the hopes that Trump then will ultimately force Netanyahu to end the war. That's the gamble that Hamas has taken. Their broader position is we will not release a single Israeli captive unless there is a deal that leads to a permanent ceasefire and the full withdrawal of Israeli forces. I spoke to a senior Hamas official last week about these aid plans that you're talking about, and he said, no one has consulted with us about this. We're not involved with this. And the dime's worth of difference between the Israeli position and Trump's position on how aid should be administered ultimately plays to Israel's agenda. Now, there's also discussion that there may be a summit involving the Palestinian Authority president, Mahmoud Abbas, who's 89 years old, incredibly unpopular, is viewed by Hamas and, in fact, many Palestinians as a collaborator with Israel. It's possible that Trump is going to try to make some deal that circumvents both Israel and Hamas and Islamic Jihad and try to say, well, we're going to make a deal with Mahmoud Abbas. There's a lot of complicated politics behind that. So I would say, Krystal, that what Trump is trying to do with his proposal for having a so-called NGO, which really isn't an NGO, it seems, as you indicated, it's more like a Paul Bremer Coalition Provisional Authority type Iraq 2.0. What Trump is sort of trying to do is get enough aid to say, I'm doing something into the country, but not really linking it to an end to the war, which ultimately is what Netanyahu wants. So, let's see. I mean, Hamas, I think, has shown an ability to really hold out despite the massive human consequences. And I don't see them just folding because Donald Trump wants photo ops in the Middle East. I think we're still in for quite a battle, both diplomatically and potentially militarily on the ground. Now, look, what Netanyahu has responded to all of this in public. all of these reports about Trump and Hamas, Trump and Ansar Allah in Yemen, as sort of saying, well, we're going to go in and conquer all of Gaza. We're going to take all of Gaza. We're going to force the Palestinians into the south, and then we're going to have to try to figure out what third countries are going to take them. So he's really telegraphing, I want to continue this genocide. The question is Trump willing to actually rein him in a serious way? Or is Trump going to try to have it both ways, let it be a little bit calmer for some months, and then it all blows up again, which is basically what happened with the January ceasefire deal.
And it seems like a lot of that rides on what he hears from Steve Witkoff. So we can go ahead and roll B2B on the screen. These were celebrations from Palestinians in the aftermath of the news. You can see this on your screen. This is a spontaneous march that was in Gaza City after the announcement yesterday. And when that's finished, we can put B3 on the screen. This is from Steve Witkoff. It is a drop site tweet noting that Israel's Channel 12 reported that Steve Witkoff's meeting with hostage families, he said that basically, quote, Israel is prolonging the war even though there's no path forward, which is what a lot of the hostage families actually already believe as well. So, Jeremy, this brings us to the momentum, at least, if people are looking for a glimmer of good news. The momentum is at least in a positive direction towards a ceasefire. But what could a potential timeline look like? I mean, if we put B4 on the screen, Jeremy, you had, and we talked to you about this last week, you had an interview with a top Hamas official last week in Dropsite on May 5th. So you have a sense of what might be on the table right now. In the next week or so, while there is this sense of momentum, what is the best case scenario and what is the worst case scenario?
I mean, first of all, it really is heartbreaking, and this has happened a number of times over the past 19 months when Palestinians in Gaza hear any sort of good news or something that feels like a step forward. People are so desperate for an end to this that they do go into the streets and they do celebrate. And sometimes it's real, and sometimes a deal is in the works. And other times, Israel just responds by escalating the attacks. I mean, just in the last 24 hours, we've had a couple of dozen Palestinians, most of them women and children, killed in heavy attacks that were conducted by Israel. So, on that front, it continues to be very heartbreaking, but understandable why people are so desperate for this. On the issue of Witkoff is saying what is basic common sense now among the families of Israeli captives, and that they've been saying for a very long time. So from their perspective, you now have an American official in Steve Witkoff, and to a degree in Donald Trump, that are willing to openly criticize Netanyahu for not prioritizing the freedom of Israeli captives. This is a departure from the way Antony Blinken or people in the Biden administration were conducting themselves. They were very reluctant to publicly criticize Netanyahu. At the end of the day, I think the best case scenario is that the United States recognizes that Netanyahu's agenda is totally counter to what would be good for the United States in the world, is totally counter to what would be good for stability in the region. And that means actually being willing to speak with organizations and movements like Hamas, because whatever one thinks about Hamas, they were the last democratically elected government in Gaza. They're not particularly happy about continuing to be the government. But if you are able to work with them to try to stabilize the situation, I think that we would find that the Middle East that there would be steps in the right direction, and that Donald Trump's sort of accidental way in which he could end up making a deal ends up being a good case scenario because it ends war, because it gives some opening to talk. The worst case scenario is that Trump is very crassly and cravenly trying to secure these deals, give the facade that he actually wants peace, and at the end of the day, washing his hands of it and allowing the Netanyahus and the Mike Huckabees of the world to determine what American policy is going to be. That would be a catastrophic series of events. I think it's more likely we'll have some sort of a deal. Whether that deal is going to be acceptable to the Palestinians and make it more likely that they're going to get liberation or self-determination is a very, very serious question that remains unanswerable right now.
To that point, Jeremy, if it ends up that Hamas committing to demilitarize, if that ends up being a red line, where are they on that question?
I mean, it often gets thrown around in the media in a simplistic way. What does it actually mean? Let's not just talk about Hamas in a broader sense among Palestinians. The idea that Palestinians are supposed to just hand in all weapons and trust that the world is going to somehow keep Netanyahu or Israel at bay is a farce that history shows is a total lie. So it's not just about, Hamas has some weapons stored somewhere that they want to use to go attack Israel. We're talking about the very existence of the Palestinian people. There have been suggestions that if there's a hudna, the Arabic term for a long-term truce, that Hamas would be willing to make concessions on how weapons would be stored, how weapons would be held. But right now, they're not really engaging much with that discussion outside of a technical framework that results in a U.S. guaranteed end to the genocide and full withdrawal of Israeli forces. So, of course, Hamas is going to say this is a million red lines at present. But the devil will be in the details. If the international community ensured that Palestinians were going to have sovereignty and were going to be able to constitute an armed force capable of defending its territorial integrity, then I think that the rationale for groups like Hamas or Islamic Jihad having the weapons goes away. When people get their freedom and they get their stability, they don't need to be engaged in resistance movements, armed resistance movements. That's the core of the story. So from their perspective, weapons aren't the issue. The issue is their rights as a people. And you can make the resistance movements irrelevant by respecting the rights of Palestinians as all other people in the world are supposed to have under international law.
And go ahead, Krystal.
Last question for you, Jeremy. We're about to talk about the Air Force One replacement from Qatar and the extraordinary corruption of this administration. But I wanted to get your opinion on, the reason why Qatar wants to gift this plane to the Trump administration and how that ties into the various negotiations that are going on here.
I mean, I have no idea what the actual, if there's like a specific policy motivation for it, but Donald Trump, the store of Donald Trump's presidency is wide open for business, and that's very clear. Qatar is obviously an increasingly powerful player in international diplomacy. It is a major figure in the Gaza negotiations, but also in other regional issues. So, Qatar is subjected to a lot of smears. Qatar also is playing its own game here and recognizes that it is increasingly an influential player. And I think that it's symbolic of the fact that we have a man in the White House who views the White House as a business that can benefit himself and his family. And, at the end of the day, maybe we'll do something good for America. But let's be clear about it. Donald Trump is an open store ready for more business.
Yeah,
well
I know
said.
Ryan was pointing out on Twitter that in the first Trump administration, there was apparently some sort of real estate bailout that Jared Kushner's dad was looking for from Qatar, and they declined. And then they felt that they really screwed up by not just, giving the Trump administration whatever grift and gift and corruption that they were asking for at the time. So apparently they learned that lesson.
Yeah, I mean, it is extraordinary. It's Presidency Inc. No doubt about it. But I'll just go back to actually what Hamas people have told me. They recognize all of that, and they realize in that specific kind of institutional corruption, there may be opportunity to accidentally get something better than they would have gotten, from the adults in the room under Biden. And I think they're right.
Who were ideological, committed Zionists. So we'll see where all of this goes. Jeremy, thank you so much for taking the time to break it all down for us. Great to see you.
Thank you as always.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.